There we go.
All right. Good morning. Welcome, everyone, to Accuracy in America, the post-Thanksgiving edition. And I'm Don Irvine, your host, joined by my co-host, Brian McNichol.
Hello, deplorables, dregs, despicables, chumps, Neanderthals, semi-fascists, and of course, those dog-faced pony soldiers.
All right. So always a lot going on. Just a little. How was Thanksgiving? You have a good one?
It was good. Went and ate with some good friends and had a nice visit and didn't have to clean up anything. It was, plenty to eat, and it was good. We had a good time.
Yeah, I mean, we kept waiting for that invitation from our friends, and it finally came. I don't know, maybe it came on Tuesday or whatever. So my wife was relieved that we had a place to go, so we didn't have to just deal with it on our own. But yes, I like that. Go somewhere else. We brought a little dish to share, but we don't really have to get involved in the cleanup.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. My kids go help them. They stack all the dishes and all that stuff. They enjoy it, and they get to talk to people. Meet people they wouldn't normally meet, but. It was like the big responsibility of actually cleaning all this stuff and putting it all up and all that. We don't have to deal with it, so which was pretty cool.
Yeah. So these friends of ours, I mean, it's there's 3 families here in the Maryland area that where some of the kids of these families married each other. So you have this kind of little dynasty going on, this thing. So as a result of that, it's everybody who's still in the area and anybody coming from out of town that's part of the family comes. So it's all these generations of this family. So it can be a fairly large group, and then they invite a few others. And I think this one was probably close to what I'd seen when we first got invited years ago, somewhere in the neighborhood, if you get 40 or 50 people with kids or whatever, it's a nice gathering.
Yeah.
Nice
It's
chance.
fun. It's a fun deal,
Yeah, it is a fun deal. All right. Next on the news, it's local news yet national news. And I just have to comment on this because it happened virtually in my backyard. Those watching out there, if you haven't seen the story, look up, Gaithersburg, Maryland plane crash, and you will see this little plane.
I think you could just Google the word dangling.
Yeah, probably
they were dangling.
Yeah,
for like a long time.
This was pretty amazing. I mean, when you see the pictures, this plane, this guy and his passenger. I mean, he managed to crash his plane into a Pepco transmission, local utility transmission tower, and got it wedged in there. But it was what it was, as you said, it was dangling. I mean, in order to do this, not only did they have to de-energize, these towers and the wires and everything, like lines like that, they also had to tether the plane so they could get in there safely and get the 2 passengers out, the occupants out, before they could go ahead and take the plane and then take it down. And I think they were in that plane for about 6 or 7 hours before they got extricated. Right. Luckily,
dangled for a long time.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you hear air traffic. There was an air traffic control thing about how he was too low. There's also now a 9/11 recording about their conversation, that he had there, and then the conversation that just he and his passenger had in the cockpit. Yeah, they were concerned. I mean, you're 100, 200 feet up or whatever it was, and you just don't know. I mean, it's one of those things you see in the movies where you make the slightest movement and you could go like over a cliff or whatever. I mean, it was pretty precarious. Yeah. And so the first responders did a heck of a job getting all that done. But it was only 4 miles or so away from my house. And I'm comfortably ensconced here in this basement. I'm just kind of watching something on Netflix or whatever, and just checking my email. And then all of a sudden, everything goes pitch black. And I'm thinking like, okay, I've had the power go out in this house occasionally, but just for short periods of time. Ever since I've lived up here, it's extremely rare for the power to go out here.
Yours is like mine, the cable's buried, right?
The cables are buried, so it's not like trees are falling over and things like that. So some, I have my phone with me, so I'm kind of going around like this, and I go, immediately to the circuit breakers. I'm like, well, nothing's flipped, so that's interesting. So I head upstairs and I look outside, and it is dark. I mean, I've never seen it so dark. All of our little street lights are out there. No house lights are on. Nothing going on there. But I did hear some sirens, and I thought something happened. Somebody took out something that caused this. Never imagined it would have been an airplane, stuck in it, crashing into a transmission tower. But that power outage, I think they said it was about 85,000 customers are affected. And it's kind of weird how these transmission lines go, because a friend of mine was saying that hers was out for about 6 hours, and she lives, I live in Gaithersburg. You've been to my house. She lives in Wheaton off of Connecticut Avenue. Okay.
Oh, wow.
I mean, going from Montgomery Village all the way down. I mean, she got the power in that area, got down. So, and I know that there are some people, I guess, apparently in the Montgomery Village area that had flickering power, but they didn't lose their power. So it's not like it's always the close in guys. Sometimes it's just the way the transmission line goes, and it can look like a little bit of a weird path. That's when I wish I had a drone. I would have tried to fly a drone and say, what the heck's going on out here?
Yeah, I hear you.
But luckily, the occupants are okay. One was released from the hospital. The other one, I think, is still in the hospital. But boy, I mean, that was, we're just sitting there going like, okay, where are the flashlights in the house, rather than having to use up our cell phone flashlights. And I dared to get a small drink of water out of the refrigerator. And boy, did my wife come down on me for that, because it's like, do not let the cold air escape. Right.
That's right.
But, it was the thing that I think one of the things that the best thing about it, if there was an upside to this in terms of, people didn't really suffer as much as they would have had it been 25 or 30 degrees instead of 45 to 50 degrees,
Right.
So we didn't, even though we didn't have any electricity, we had no heat of any kind. You can make it through that with the temperatures outside being in the 40s and 50s. Being in the 20s and 30s would have been a little bit harder road to hoe.
And it's dangerous. And the other thing is, like, Pepco is one of your lesser utility companies in the country. And would it take them like 2 days to get everybody back on, right? Then they closed schools for a day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends upon where they were. I mean, we were up and running in about 5 hours, which I think is pretty good considering the extent of what happened there. Pepco is now, they were bought by Exelon a few years ago. They have definitely gone through some pretty rough patches here with trees falling on lines. A lot of complaints, customer complaints over the years about how they've done things. I don't think running utility, is very easy, especially when you have a mixture. You have all these power lines that are above ground. You've got trees. Nobody cuts back the trees. Everybody's pointing. Who's responsible? Is it the county? Is it the city? Is it the state? Responsible for making sure that.
Right. The thing that hurts them is, you're right next door to Virginia that gets this right. Our power very rarely goes out here, and when it does, it's restored really quickly, and everybody's kept informed, and it's organized, and they come out and cut the growth back off the trees, and no one fights them over that. We want reliability. So, one of the things that really hurts, I've always thought hurt Pepco is that it's across from people who do it right. And, every mistake is magnified because, the people in Virginia, they're sitting in their air conditioning, watching all this on TV,
Right. Except unless you get stuck on 995 during a snowstorm.
That's true. They're not as good at that.
That was a little bit of a fail for them there. But you're right. And I think one of the problems, and this is just maybe me, but I think one of the problems that we have in Maryland is that, they're very enamored of having these big tree canopies. They think this is gorgeous. They think it's great to have this. But those are all risks. When you have above ground power lines, I mean, even old trees become a risk, with wind, right? They topple over, old age. So, and there's no maintenance. There's virtually no maintenance by anybody on any of this. Pepco has, stepped up their efforts.
They're anti-maintenance. It's like they don't, you'll mess with the natural. And anytime you get ready to do it, there's a big fight. Can we allow this tree to be cut? And
right.
It's like,
right. And the other thing about this airplane crash, and I knew this was going to happen, and it happened just like that, which is all the people in this area who don't like the airport. They say it noise, safety. They were right on that from the get-go. Once again, with their complaints to the county council about this. Of course, the air park was there first. The homes were there later. When you move in, it's not like the air park is hidden. It's like
not kept secret. That's right.
Any time of the day.
Like,
anytime
I
of the day
first moved here. I lived down near National Airport, and people are always griping. There was the big noise abatement plan, and the planes all had to fly down the river, and the people are all griping about the anti-noise coalition, and it's like they built National Airport in like the early 20s, right? So if you live there now, you lived there when I was living there in the late 80s, right? It was no secret that you were moving next to an airport. The airport's been there almost 70 years, right? So don't be surprised when you get airport effects from living near an airport. So if you don't want all that, don't live near an airport. Because they have to be somewhere, and that's where it was.
I mean, we have a friend of ours who, when we first moved from our house in Silver Spring up here to Gaithersburg, she was like, "Aren't you bothered by the airplane noise?" And I'm like, at first you notice it, but actually. I think it's, for us, it's not as big a deal anymore because, several years ago, we replaced all the windows with those insulated windows, and it actually does deaden the noise. You don't hear as much of the outside noise. But, it's just to me, it's just kind of background white noise. I mean, it's part of living there. I knew that was there, and I'm not going to complain about it. I mean, the air park has been a good neighbor. We've lived up here for 18 years. This is only the second major kind of incident that I can recall in 18 years. And, like a guy at the gym said when we were talking about it the other day, because the gym is located nestled just a mile from my house here, an older guy, he was just like, it's just like banning roads because of accidents.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's kind of right. I mean, it's like, we have more fatalities on the roads in this area than we do by the airplanes taking off and landing here in the area.
Right.
So it's all of that, there's kind of a NIMBYism and everything like that.
We're going to prevent everything. No, you're not going to prevent everything.
Right.
Just live life.
We have Montgomery County's got the inter-county connector. It had been on the books since like the 1950s. It finally got built when Bob Ehrlich became governor. He got that ball rolling finally after decades of nothing going on there. And then what happened? Everybody on the ICC route started to protest. It's like, you knew about this, or at least you were supposed to be told that you're in the right of way, or your home, this is where it's not going to tear down a home. It's just going to be near, here's the path.
Right. Because they stopped approving stuff along the path.
Right.
Decades ago.
Right. So it was clear, and just, they were all complaining about it. Just like, sorry. I mean, this is something that's been out there. Just because politicians have been unable to get it going for 30 years, doesn't mean it wasn't going to ever happen. I mean, there was always that. It's on the books. It just took somebody to finally, with the guts, to push it through, like Ehrlich did. And, the county residents, I mean, that road now is pretty darn heavily used. I can't believe how heavily used that road is now. So
vital link in that part of the
world.
Yeah,
it really is. All right, enough of the local stuff, local/national stuff. Chinese protests. What a I don't know. This is what they get, though, right? I mean, all these severe lockdowns, and the people are fed up, and now they're trying to use surveillance cameras to find these protesters. This is smacks of Hong Kong all over again. But I know you probably have a lot to say about China and the lockdown.
Well, so this all started was a city in Western China. They actually welded the doors of the apartment building shut to keep people from getting out, make them stay in there to prevent COVID, prevent transmission. So fire started and people couldn't get out and they died. So, not a whole lot of people, but some people before they could get the fire out. And, people are outraged by this, and it's like just, control, just the government's willingness, or wanting to control this in this way and get to zero by isolating everybody and a lot of public health things that don't make any sense. And the country has gotten fed up. Now you got to, in China, like here, we can all go out and protest, and we can all, run our mouth on Twitter or whatever, and it's with little consequence, right? But there, it's like every time you say something against the government, it's marked down in a book, and you are regarded as less of a person. And if you get to a certain extent with it, which is not a very high threshold, you're punished for it, or your family is punished for it. So, and they keep up with it, and they have all this stuff on this social credit system now, right? So, I mean, if they decide to turn you off, you can't buy anything, you can't ride mass transit, which, the country is relying on. You have all these other things that they just cut you off. You can't do it. So, I mean, they've really like squelched down on protests there, but you've gotten to a point now where the people don't care. Like it's, being welded into a building. How is that worse than whatever the government would do to you? Right. So, they have a big problem. It's interesting. If you think about, the mullahs in Iran, they're under siege, right? Thousands of people in the streets protesting. The soccer team told, if you do anything political in this game against the United States, we will torture and kill your family. Torture and kill. So it will be unpleasant for your family. And then, the Chinese, this is a domestic threat to China not seen since before the time of Mao, right? This is a big time numbers of people in the street, big time worries amongst the Chinese people about keeping control of the country, big threat to power to Xi or any person in his position during the communist era of China, right? This is the closest they've ever come. Russia, the head of Russia is losing a war that he thought would last 3 days. He is apparently ill, and he is losing his influence. So, the three of the baddest guys in the world, right, are in real live danger of losing their positions of power. You could get a lot of upheaval in the world in the next 2 or 3 years, which is sort of puts us in a bad position because we're at a low point in terms of leadership, ability to project policy around the world, project influence around the world. We have a weak president, weak military, in a situation where we could use strong leadership, and the whole world knows that we do not have it.
Yeah, and on the Parliament complex, I mean, those weren't those people that had tested positive or something like that. I mean, they were trying to isolate them, right? I mean, also China's been putting these people in locations like that, but the idea that you basically shut them in and prevent them from leaving, like this, and then this tragedy occurs. The zero lockdown policy is not working for them. I mean, you can't. How do you build up any immunity? The people aren't out with other people. Where you look at the rest of the world where people are now mingling. Look at us. I mean, we're getting together in groups, and we're not seeing any mass spread of this anymore. This type of thing. We've built up immunity. We're doing just fine. We're
more than 90% of us have had it now.
Yeah, we're recovering, so we're going along there. And, I mean, Chinese people, I find it fascinating that they've, risen up, especially in light of, what happened after Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong had those massive protests. China went in and started to crack down. Nothing happens in Hong Kong anymore, but they imprison so many people. It's very authoritarian now, obviously. It's just, it's Hong Kong is not what it used to be. Businesses have fled Hong Kong.
Oh, right.
Right. The economic
engine has dropped out of it economically. And that was a big source of money for China.
Yeah.
All the business activity in Hong Kong. The other thing is, like, did you see this thing? They're building the pods prison, right? It's like 90,000 little prison pods in this big complex, like Guangzhou or whatever, China, right? It's these. I mean, they look like those little pods that you get. You put your moving stuff in, and then the truck comes and gets it. It's like that size, and it's for people, right? And and they're like little jails, and they're pop-ups. They build them in 10 minutes, and you can see the little cell door, the little striped sunshine things, the little grills up there where you can get air in there, but you can't get out. And I mean, they're getting ready to lock up whoever wants to protest, And I don't know. I mean, at some point you reach a breaking point in this where, the pressure is too great and you can't keep locking up people. But, China, they're probably a long way from that point. There's probably a lot more people they can lock up before, society gives way. But, we may find out.
Yeah, it did not take long for China to basically destroy the economy of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And the opportunities that were. I mean, Western businesses they were happy. Everybody was thriving there until the crackdown. And then, it's just changed the nature of Hong Kong. I mean, why would you want to visit Hong Kong under these kind of things? Yeah. I mean, China, obviously huge population, but it's been until fairly recently, a good source of cheap labor and things like that. But, all of these lockdowns, that stifles any manufacturing that they have. And I think maybe it's making some more people suspicious about the figures that China reports on their economy. I've never really trusted them because it's the Chinese government reporting it, right. Independent reports of what's going on there. They talk about slowing growth, but they still continue to report like positive growth, maybe anemic. But, with all the stuff that goes on in China, I don't think it's anywhere close to what even China's reporting, right? I mean, how can it be?
Yeah, it's not, and you're tied to old processes, right? Labor-intensive manufacturing, right? I mean, we don't really do that in this country anymore, right? We've kind of moved past that economically, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Iran, and so obviously we had this, I don't know, politically charged, World Cup game, whatever you want to call it. I mean, some controversy there. And obviously the situation in Iran, they're struggling. They're struggling to control the protests there. And so, yeah, it's ramifications there. But, it has been interesting to see just how many Iranians really have come out against the government. A lot of the expats basically, they were cheering for the U.S. to win. The U.S. team, men's national team, was getting all kinds of support from Iranians that are just, in solidarity. They don't like what's happened in Iran. The death of that one young woman has sparked, lots of protests, and lots of other things have been going on since then. And they're having a hard time keeping control of this. So that's a potential, flashpoint there. And I don't know. I mean, what happens to the Iranian, team? They lose, they're out now, right? They go home. What happens to them? It'd be a little bit of a contrast to, what was it, Saudi Arabia? They win an upset game, national holiday, and there was some report that like all the players were given a Rolls Royce or something.
Yeah,
they may never win another game.
Better to win.
It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
But that politics kind of infuses itself into sports and into the World Cup, as a result of that. So we'll have to wait and see how all that turns out as well. Kind of in relation to all this too is Dr. Fauci he's on his way out, but he made mention that it apparently is that he's open to the idea of maybe the Wuhan lab leak.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's like what's up with that?
But it's still, if you read the thing, it's still far more likely in his view that it was, animals in the wet market and this and that and the other. It's like, okay, at this point, it wasn't animals in the wet market. We can rule that out, right? This had to do with bat guano, right? And so, and from 600 miles away, right? So it's like, here, like something native to Nashville turns up here, right? That's not because of the wet market. It's because something native from Nashville turned up here, right? That's about 600 miles. So, he is, a legacy of, dealing from the bottom of the deck, outright lying. I mean, like you can go on the internet and see these, mashups of him saying, yes, you must use masks. No, masks don't really matter. Yes, you must use masks. No, masks don't really matter. Over and over and over, right? And so, like, he's a political figure. Here was a guy, who ran a pretty quiet federal agency for decades, and all of a sudden, and he had done it, with the regular amount of. I mean, they're like the FIFA, of infectious medicine and infectious medicine treatment, right? So they're like awarding the conferences, and they are, choosing which scientists and science goes forward and which does not, right? And no one's watching because there's no pandemic, and all of a sudden there's a pandemic, and they're completely unready. They're completely botched, like identifying the source of it. They botched the response because they promised if something like this happens, our response will favor these certain entities, right, for various reasons. The big pharma and so forth. We're going to solve it with vaccines. We're going to take that approach of preventing it and so forth, right? We knew pretty early in this thing that it was not preventable, right? I think, people say, did Trump ever make a mistake? I think Trump's one mistake Trump did make in this was, early on, and he came on and gave the speech where they had 15 people, right? We got 15 people who have it, and we think 14 of them are pretty good. And we hope this 15th guy is going to pull through, and we'll be back to we just keep these people apart and everything's fine. And I'm like, that's not how. If you told me 3 people, okay, we could put 3 people on an island somewhere and make them. But 15 people, it's too deep, right? Even at that point, you're not hemming in 15 people. So it's going to get out. And if it, kills us all, then it's going to kill us all, right? But then you could pretty plainly see that it wasn't killing everybody. Okay. And, and Fauci's interest was not in adjusting to that information, right? When we realized the fatality rate was what it is, which is, really quite small, still it's like the median death age, the age at which more, equal numbers of people have been older or younger is 85 and a half. It's actually going up. It's actually getting older. So, half the people who died of this were older than 85 and a half. So, that's we should have been making policy on treatment on this years ago, ameliorate it and treatment. And we didn't because he had a stake in doing it the other way. And so now you have a messed up situation, and he's curtsying off to the side. But I think the House, I think it is be very useful. It's going to look like a political operation, and probably will be to some extent. But it's very useful for the House to get this out and take a look at it and hold hearings and let people see what actually happened here for the purpose of keeping it from happening again.
Yeah, I just whatever credibility that Fauci had built up during his long career, he just blew it to smithereens with the handling of COVID. And look where we are, man. Because I think a few weeks ago I had put down there, the flu is back, right? So what are our health reports on right now? RSV, flu, and and hospitals at capacity. No mention really of COVID in all of this, but unlike COVID, there's also no mention of okay, we've got to do this, we've got to lock it down because we've got all these cases, and I think this was fairly predictable for us, is that COVID came in and it became the big reporting number, and the flu numbers all of a sudden dropped through the floor. Well, now we're back to kind of a normal, or maybe normalish kind of flu season. No one's really panicking. We got lots of reports, like I said, about hospitalizations that are, hospitals that are kind of struggling a little bit with some of their bed capacity and whatnot. But I don't hear the same, ominous signals about this. It's the flu. It's an RSV. Right. I mean, these things happen, and we have been dealing with this for a long time. And we're not, at least we're not panicking about this. And now we're getting back to a little bit more of what the normal is in our lives, or had been a normal in our lives before COVID.
Right. That's right.
Georgia runoff. So that comes up on is that next week?
Yeah. Tuesday.
Yeah. Next Tuesday. So there's just under a week to go. it could be tight. I mean, turnout, the early voting, I guess, has started. So there's people out there voting. Well, Warnock may have a better organized machine on this than Walker is. And now Walker's getting dogged by residency issues in terms of whether or not is he a Texas resident or is he a Georgia resident? I just saw this morning that somebody in Georgia has filed a suit about this, that because he's gotten, apparently Walker has received a homestead tax exemption in Texas for years for his $4 million home in Texas, and he's using as his residence in Georgia, his wife's home in Georgia, and all of that. You have, to run for Senate, you need to be a resident of the state. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Is Herschel Walker a resident of Georgia? Is a resident of Texas? I don't really know.
Well,
at this stage.
I don't think you're going to get a long way convincing people that Herschel Walker is not part of the state of Georgia, right? I mean,
Georgia heritage for sure.
He's as big a part of Georgia history as anybody the last 50 years or whatever. I don't know, like as a real time political talking point, how big that is. The original election, Warnock won by about 45,000 votes. About 85,000, maybe a little bit less, went to a libertarian candidate. So, you don't get all those votes going over to the Republican side, but you do get some of them. It's hard to predict whose turnoff drops off the most because it's, one race on the ballot and so forth. There is record early voting. They've had 2 days of record early voting there. And that would, again, seem to favor Warnock. But, what has happened is, and you mentioned the political organizations of the two. Actually, Brian Kemp has hooked his political organization, the governor, who won with nearly 60% of the vote in his reelection bid back in November. We're still in November, so it's also
barely.
He has put his whole political operation at the service of Herschel's campaign, including his get out the vote effort, which is supposedly really effective. So, it's make upable. Polling shows it to be very, very close, like too close to call, well within every poll, no matter there's been one or two that say Herschel's ahead, one or two that say Warnock's ahead, but all well within margin of error. So, you don't really know what's going to happen. It's a turnout, who's willing to vote for this. So, it'll be interesting to see it. It is a very big deal because, if Herschel wins, then the Senate can't, the Democrats can't be the majority on committee. So, you fight for all this legislation at the committee level before it ever makes it to the floor, which is good, good for the senators, basically, because the fights are farther from public view than they normally would be. And I am not convinced that if it's 50-50 that Joe Manchin can't be flipped, right? I still think that they should work on that project and flip him because he comes up in 2 years. There, like you say, there's a lot of good talented candidates in West Virginia who are willing to take him on. He cannot win as a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, Manchin is kind of that wild card in here, especially if we get to 50-50. I mean, he can join a clear majority party if make the Republicans a majority party, and they can get all those, they can take all the committee chairs and everything like that and assignments. But that's what's right now is is key is that the Republicans need Walker to win, so that they're more even up on the committees rather than having the Democrats just kind of railroad things through here and things like that. We're already seeing the Democrats going to push as much legislation through before the new Congress takes effect next year. So this could be a very at least attempted active lame duck session here that we're having already. So it'll be important. You kind of need to stop this agenda as soon as you can. And it is a good sign that Kemp, who didn't really do anything with Walker during the campaign, is willing to throw his support behind Walker this time, because Kemp showed that he's pretty popular.
Yeah.
And I think Trump is kind of staying away from Walker, so that gives a little more clear path. I mean, if Walker can disassociate himself a little bit from Trump, but align himself with a popular governor, he might just be able to pull this off. And as you said, it's hard to say, in an election when it's just this runoff, how many votes will be cast compared to how many were cast, in early November. It's hard to say. We had the Libertarian candidate. Do some of those votes go to Walker? More, a majority of those, can he get 60% of those, or more? I don't know. It's gonna be hard to say at this point in time. But I think everybody's eyes will be watching that. I mean, it looks like the Republicans are going to have 222 in the House in all likelihood.
No.
So they'll have that. They'll have a very
little breathing room.
They have a little breathing room, but not much. Obviously, not as much as everybody had hoped. But it does give the Republicans control of the chamber, which will, we've talked about before in terms of what investigations will take place under Republicans versus Democrats, and all this. But I mean, do you have any fears that Kevin McCarthy will not become the Speaker of the House?
Doesn't have the votes right now. And I don't, I think that there are a lot of people, there's some people in Congress who are looking to make a point of this, right? And the way to make the point is to refuse to vote for it. So, I mean, I don't know if you saw it last night, but I guess Bill Kristol is trying to get people to say, get a few, right-thinking Republicans to go for somebody like a Barbara Comstock as Speaker, where, you don't have to be a member of the House, and she's a Republican, but, she's not a Trump person or whatever. And, bail out McCarthy or whatever. But, I don't see anything like that happening. I think that they probably eventually will coalesce around him, but I think they're going to make some demands, and I think they're going to be demands that he can't easily squirrel out of, right? He's going to have to probably do what he says on these things. So, yeah, there's some rough times ahead for the Democrats, for the Republicans, because they don't have the votes for him to be the Speaker right now. And so which sort of throws the whole, leadership situation, who runs the committees, all that kind of stuff out of control, because until you get those big three nailed down, the Speaker, the leader, and the whip, right, then you can't fill the other chairs, right, because it was not clear who's going to be in those.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, for the Democrats in the minority, there'll be a whole new group of leadership in terms of the top positions. So it looks like, I guess, Hakeem Jeffries becomes the minority leader there.
It's okay if there's election deniers in those positions, because
yeah. Look, it's fine if it's on the Democrat side, right?
So yeah, I don't know. They it was interesting. Their leaders all stepped away. I mean, if you don't do this, it's hard to understand like how much worse it is to be in Congress and be a member of the minority than the majority. All the indignities that come with that, and it's a lot of work to ultimately lose nearly every time. So,
Pelosi was good at vote counting. She was a good politician, and for the Democrats, she served them pretty well overall during her time as Speaker. But there had always been that undercurrent where, a lot of Democrats were looking for younger leadership, and so you had your top three leaders all being over 80 years old. So now you've got a younger group of leaders coming in. But it also may wind up being far more progressive liberal in the long run too, which could create other splits. I mean, the progressives are going to continue to make a lot of noise within the Democrats and probably still be a little bit of a pain in their side for them.
Right. They have a problem. There's some quiet little stories about this election that, they weren't really able to contain their progressive wing on the other side. And yeah, Republicans hope to get more out of this election, but it went from in the presidential election just 2 years ago was 7 million more votes for the Democrats than for the Republicans. In 2022, it was 6 million more votes for the Republicans than the Democrats. So, that's a 13 million vote swing at a time when the turnout goes down, right? So something happened there. A lot of votes moved to the right, and you can tell where it happened. California, New York, some really progressive places throughout, I think New York flipped 6 districts, something like that, right? I mean, that's a big turnover in Congress, and it's in a very hardcore Democrat state, been a hardcore Democrat state for decades, and people have said enough. So, tap into what's winning there. How did they win? What are they what are they campaigning on? And I think they're going into the teeth of, parents' rights, school choice, a lot of this, the twerking in schools, the trans twerking in the kindergarten, those are the kind of things that we're winning political issues this year. And it's because it's a real danger to your kids. So, I think, there's a very meat and potatoes issues, and, we are closer to the American public than they are. And, I think look at those playbooks. What won? What prevailed?
Yeah, I mean, and inflation and the potential of a looming, recession coming up don't help the Democrats at all, because they're technically in control of the government, and a lot of the people who would vote Democrat before, they switched. They're thinking like, it's not working under Joe Biden and company. Maybe the Republicans can help, ease the pain in the pocketbook and everything like this, and
the next time, and it's coming pretty soon because of the winter and the shipping problems and so forth. But the next time there's a big pressure on gas prices to go up, he's not going to be able to release all this oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're already on 50-year lows in that, and replacing it is going to be you're taking out oil we bought at $24 a barrel, and now you want to replace it with oil that we're paying $70 or $80, $90 a barrel for. That doesn't make any sense at all. So it's going to stay low for a while. And he's getting to the point where, that trick has kind of run its course. He really can't do that anymore. So, I look for some things to change there too, and for things to get a lot worse economically, unfortunately, over the next 2 years, no matter who controls Congress.
Yeah, and I mean, just that thing where where Biden is using the release of the oil from the SPR as a point that I have made the largest release.
Yeah.
I'm fighting those high gas prices. It's like, yeah,
that's like your one where you said, I gave you the biggest Social Security COLA in 50 years. Why? Because you had the highest rate of inflation in 50 years, right? It's like, what do they call it? Taking your L's, right?
Yeah, no, I was just like, yeah, it's amazing what he keeps doing. I mean, and there was this other comment he did too. He talked about the supply chain, didn't he? It's like no one knew what the hell the supply chain was, it's like 10 years ago or something like that. It's like, I think plenty of people knew what the supply chain was.
Joy Reid said, people didn't know what had never used the word inflation until this election. Now, like it's wrapped around everything they do and say and think. Like they've come up with this word, It's like, hey, lady, the reason that we never talked about inflation is because until, Joe Biden got in, it wasn't that big a problem, right? So all these things that like you bring up, it's because this administration is uniquely bad in its management of, the economy, energy, foreign affairs. They're not just a little off the graph, right? They're a long way. They've made a complete hash of this.
Yeah, and we have this potential rail strike, right? And so so now now Biden's going to get Congress to basically force them back, make sure they, they'll put the agreement in place that they had before with some other things that they had agreed to, and from further negotiations and whatnot. Biden is supposed to be the pro-labor president. He's been a big, he's really done whatever, he bent over backwards for labor unions. this is not making the labor unions happy at all. This kind of a thing. And I could have sworn I meant to go back and look, but wasn't he boasting about his agreement when they first came to this agreement, when he thought he had this thing signed, sealed, and delivered?
Biden stepped up and negotiated everybody into peace and happiness. Yeah. And, oh, well, we're not sure that, a week later. You see, the other thing that bothers me about all this stuff, and like the thing we were talking about a minute ago, they tell you these stories, right? They think you're so stupid that you won't think, well, wow, that's because the colas went up because the cost went up. First word of cola is cost, right? So, that's right. And they're so dumb that they don't think anybody will look this up or realize why this has happened or what the implications are or what they threw in the pot to make this happen. So, that their opinion of the American people is really low, right? Of what we know and understand or capable of figuring out. So, if nothing else happens, it's time to fix them on that. Hey, we're not all that dumb.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of reminds me of how Rush used to talk about low information voters.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and this is basically, here the Democrats have, we're for the people. We love, all of this stuff. We're here to help make sure you don't, we're going to prevent you, give you that safety net from poverty and all this stuff. But at the same point in time, I mean, they do think that the things that Biden says, the things the administration says, and the things that they do make it seem like, yes, we are counting on stupid voters so we can just say we can brag about this, and they don't understand the flip side of this as to why this really happened, which is really our fault to be,
right. That's exactly right. The voters are so stupid that they don't get it, and that's their attitude. We'll just throw some slop out there and they'll eat it up.
Yeah, it's just amazing about what goes on out there with all of that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, so if the Democrats, well, I guess part of this, I mean, we're seeing, I talked about just this kind of, they're trying to be active on the lame duck session. I mean, we have this quote Respect for Marriage Act, that looks like it's, the Senate passed it. They got 12 Republicans to go with it. The House had already, their version, I think they had already passed it with the help of 50 Republicans before. So I think, they'll just go, they'll go ahead and sign off on this. This is something that will hit Biden's desk probably not too long from now. But there's a lot of controversy about this, right? I mean, the Heritage Foundation, a lot of other conservatives are very, very unhappy about this. And, but yet, you do have a bunch of Republicans who went ahead and gave the Democrats enough votes to make this happen. I mean, what are you seeing about this?
Well, first of all, as Mike Lee pointed out, what was the threat to gay marriage, interracial marriage, all these things that it supposedly protects, right? Does anybody anywhere in the country proposed a bill to outlaw gay marriage or to not recognize gay marriages from another state? No one has, and no one was going to, right? That ship has sailed. Sorry, Ryan Anderson or whoever, you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle, right? So, what were we doing here? So all we did was codify punishing people who want to live out their own faith life. Okay. You can make me tolerate it, right? But you can't make me accept it. Okay. And that's what this is trying to do, is trying to make you accept it, make you endorse it. Somebody comes to you to have a wedding done, you're supposed to just do it because that's, the law says, hey, we recognize these weddings. But so you're forcing people to participate in exercises that are at core religious, right? Marriage is a religious entity, right? And so I think that like a lot of these things, it's going to run afoul of some constitutional problems that may render it a lot less harmful, because I think at the end of the day, to enforce this law, as I understand it to be, you have to define what a church is and B, define what are religious practices. And I think both of those, constitute establishment of a religion, which the Constitution forbids.
So do you think like an organization like Alliance Defending Freedom or whatever might take up a challenge to this and try to get it up to SCOTUS? I mean,
but I mean, it's the same deal as like the school loans deal. You got to find somebody who was harmed first.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you do have to find something. You have to find that interest party. Now, one of the things, though, I mean, do you think that this, result was a result of what I've seen played out, seen reported in the media many, many times, which is Clarence Thomas's remarks after the Dobbs decision about all of the stuff that had gone on. Do you think that kind of alerted the liberals to say, "Oh, is that in danger?" This whole thing, and
well, it gave an opportunity to put
was it a smoke screen for them?
Yeah, to say, hey, well, you're gonna stand up for gay people or not, right?
Right.
Well, that's not really what you're doing,
Yeah.
But because they weren't threatened, and the protection this offers probably won't be around for long for a variety of reasons. So. It did give them an opportunity when, and all he's saying is, he's not saying these laws are coming down. What he's saying is the same law that protected the right to abortion, the same opinion that protected the right to abortion, protected the right to gay marriage and interracial marriage and contraception. It was all under the same penumbra. And if you didn't want to, if you're worried about those things, you need to understand that, this was found to be bad law, and so will that be, right? So could that potentially be? But then, so question is, does anybody want to find that as bad law? Nobody does. There's no political, nothing's coming of that. No one was trying to do that, and no one would have.
Yeah. So it's the liberals have gained on this one, and then convincing these Republicans to go along with it. I mean, there's just the political pressure and whatever, and so it started with the usual suspects and then grew.
Right. That's right. And it did grow some. The thing about it, what else could be put on a legislative track with those people, right? Most of it we probably would not like.
Right. All right. Well, let's wrap this up with the last word. What you got?
Let's see. What did we not do here? So we did spend some money on Christmas stuff this year. I think that'll be I think there's just more available, and I think it's a good sign if that's indeed what's going to happen here. As for our friends in Ukraine, there seems to be a little bit of progress made there. They are not as their big problem is the power. Russia's trying to pound their power sources and so forth. And they have it back to 70%, and they're working on it and so forth. So that's at some point you bleed Russia out of that. How long can they do that? So it'll be interesting to see, because like we were talking about earlier, the three of the worst bad guys on the planet are all in a real state of flux right now. So, that's could be a great benefit, and it could not.
Will the Republican Congress, will they be a little less willing than the Democrats were to continue to fund this? There are some Republicans who aren't crazy about this.
Right, but I think they're enough to get it over the finish line. The Democrats will stay united to support the president. It doesn't at that point, you don't really need that many, about 10 or 15 reliable votes, and what will need to pass. I mean, we're bleeding dry, one of the three great militaries on the planet at pennies on the dollar. So I think at some point, practical minds will realize that.
Yeah. All right. Anything else that you wanted to say?
The old LSU Tigers messed it up.
I didn't put that down there, but they were
the Aggies are, all these games are rivalries, right? I mean, we play Ole Miss every year. We play Mississippi State every year. It's a rivalry, right? But the Aggies have a chip on their shoulder about LSU. We fight them for a lot of players. There's a lot of players. Their final two are us and A&M. We recruit in that area heavily. So it's a big win for them. And, it's a season saver. Their season's over. And, it really didn't change. I mean, we go to the SEC championship game. If we stomp Georgia, it's going to be hard to keep us out of the playoffs, even with that loss. So, people will say, hey, 3 losses and including, some bad losses, right? I mean, that's a sub 500 team late in the season. How do you lose that game? But as long as they're going to let this many teams in the playoffs, and as you know, they're talking about adding even more. You're going to have people in there that don't deserve to be there, right? So, like when 2019, we played Oklahoma, and we had 49 points at the half. Now we had a great team. LSU, that was the year that we swept everything. But if a team gives up 49 points in the half, did they belong in the playoffs? No. So I think that college football should think about long and hard about this expansion, because you're really watering down the quality of your product.
Yeah, I mean they're already struggling sometimes with we've had some blowout games with the 4 teams that are in there. You want to go to like a 12-team thing? It's like I just see that as a recipe for disaster. You're not helping your cause by expanding that whole system. I think they struggle to find out what is exactly the right formula to get to determine the national champion. What is the fair way to do it? And so they keep tinkering with it, but. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting because we've got USC, in the mix. Interesting team. Are they? We'll see how they play against Utah for the Pac-12 championship and see if they can avenge that loss. If they win, I think that solidifies their position.
Yeah.
But yeah, the LSU Georgia game, that's a big game. If you guys go out there and do what Michigan did, to Ohio State. You can say, yeah, legitimately, you may have to rethink this whole process a little bit as to what is the determinant there and all. And I'll have to say, after all those years, of losing to Ohio State, Harbaugh's got two in a row like that, in these games. He could probably write his own ticket anywhere now. That's a huge game to win. He's kind of really got the monkey off their back for Michigan and Ohio State at this point in time. So
I told you I became a big Harbaugh fan. Did we talk about this?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, so he put out a thing that said that he told everybody in his program, players, coaches, front office, everybody, if you get pregnant and you want to have an abortion, do not have the abortion, have the baby, give the baby to me. I will raise it in my big coach salary house. So, he's my man. I'm for him. I got nothing for Ohio State. I've never taken a side in that rivalry, right? Because I'm not either one of them, right? I'm just waiting to see who wins. But if he'll do that, then I'm for him.
That's an interesting story. That's great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please, as always, stay safe and stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And as always, God bless America. And we'll see you again next week. And I guess I can say, go Herschel.
Yeah, go Herschel.
All right. We'll see you next week.